"Can my mom come get warm too?" The little girl's whisper stopped Jack Sullivan cold. He turned and saw her 8-year-old sweater 3 sizes too big, eyes carrying something no child should carry, pointing toward the far end of the parking lot. Out there in the dark, a woman sat alone in a dead minivan with 2 blankets safety pinned together across her shoulders. Engine off. No heat. Temperature dropping below 0. She had been sitting there for 4 hours refusing to come inside because she was too ashamed to ask. And her daughter had been waiting quietly, patiently, carefully for exactly the right moment to ask for her. Before we go any further, if this story touches your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I am not a man who cries easily. I want to be honest about that up front. Because this story, my story, is going to ask you to believe that I changed. And I know how that sounds coming from a man who spent 2 full years telling himself that nothing in this world could reach him anymore. I know how that sounds from a man who heated only 2 rooms of a 7-room house and called that living. My name is Jack Sullivan. I run Sullivan's Hardware on the east side of Cedar Falls. My father built it, and his father helped him do it. The store is not glamorous. It smells like machine oil and old wood and the particular kind of dust that only collects on things people have touched for decades. The cast iron heater in the corner has been there since before I was born. We used to joke that the heater was the only employee who never called in sick. I used to laugh at that joke. After Claire died, I stopped laughing at most things. She was sick for 4 years before she went. 4 years of hospital visits and medication schedules and the particular kind of hope that bends and bends until one morning it simply doesn't bend anymore. We had plans, real plans, not the vague kind. We were going to adopt. We had a folder. Claire had actually started filling out the paperwork. There was a room upstairs in the farmhouse that she kept calling the yellow room, even though we hadn't painted it yet. She said she could already see what color it needed to be after she died. I closed the door to that room and didn't open it again. I told myself I was being practical. Told myself I was surviving, which is what everyone around you encourages you to do when your world collapses. Survive. Keep going. You'll find your footing again. People say that with such certainty, like grief is a season that ends on a specific calendar date. I had been surviving for 2 years when December arrived that year, hard and sudden, the way December sometimes does in Cedar Falls. The National Weather Service called it the worst early season storm in 11 years. By the time I opened the store that Tuesday morning, there was already 8 inches on the ground and more coming sideways. The town had been in a kind of slow emergency for weeks before the snow. The plant on Route 9, the one that had employed half the families I grew up knowing, had been shut down for almost 3 years by then. People were quiet the way they're quiet about things that shame them. Like being poor is something a person does to themselves on purpose. The food pantry at St. Michael's was running short twice a month. The public warming shelter had been half-funded for 2 winters and was operating out of a church basement with 4 space heaters and not enough cots. I knew all of this the way you know things you've decided not to act on. From a distance, from behind glass. The donations started coming in around the 2nd week of November. People dropped off winter coats, canned goods, propane fuel cards, thermal socks. Somebody left 3 brand new portable heaters still in their boxes. I had nowhere to put any of it. Really. The back room was already stacked with inventory, so I pushed things into corners and told myself I'd figure out the organizing later. Later kept not coming. By the day of the storm, the break room behind my office looked like a disaster relief staging area. Boxes of gloves with no matches. Bags of children's boots sorted by no system I could identify. Coats hanging on every hook, and some just lying over the back of chairs like they'd collapsed there. I had been intending to close early that Tuesday. There was no reason to stay open in a storm like that. I'd had maybe 6 customers all day, Mrs. Hightower picking up weather stripping 2 guys from the county road crew, grabbing de-icing salt. A teenager who came in looking for a replacement bulb and stood in the wrong aisle for 10 minutes before I pointed him toward lighting. That's when I noticed Lily. She'd been coming in every afternoon for almost 3 weeks. I knew that. I'd noticed it the way you notice things in a small store. The bell above the door. The particular footsteps. The small figure who always went straight to the same chair beside the cast-iron heater without asking permission. She had an oversized backpack that seemed to be about half her body weight. She'd pull out a spiral notebook and work on homework. Then she'd read. She had this habit of pulling old home repair magazines off the rack near the heater magazines from the 90s, the kind nobody actually buys anymore, and studying them like they were textbooks. I never asked her much. She had the kind of self-contained quiet that certain children develop early, and I recognized it as something that deserved to be left alone. But she asked me questions. Small, precise questions about things she'd been reading. One afternoon she held up a magazine page showing a diagram of a water heater and said, "Mr. Jack, if the pilot light goes out by itself, does that always mean the thermocouple is bad?" I stared at her for a moment. "Where did you read that word?" "Right here," she said, completely serious. "Thermocouple. Is it bad?" "Not always," I said. "Sometimes it just needs to be cleaned." She nodded and wrote something in her notebook. I didn't think about it too much after that. I told myself she was just a kid who liked hardware stores, which is an unusual thing, but not an impossible one. I told myself whatever was going on at home was not my business. I told myself a lot of things. That Tuesday, with the storm getting worse by the hour and the temperature dropping fast, I started shutting down the registers and turning off the display lights in the front windows. It was just after 5:30. I had my coat on, and I noticed Lily was still there. She wasn't reading. She wasn't doing homework. She was sitting very still in the chair beside the heater watching the front window. There was something about the particular quality of her stillness that made me slow down. Children are not usually that still unless they're bracing for something. "Hey," I said. "Lily, store's closing up. Your mom know you're here." She didn't answer right away. She pulled the sleeves of her sweater down over her hands. The sweater was too big for her men's sized, clearly not hers, and she kept looking at the window. "Lily." She turned and looked at me, and I saw it then. The thing I'd been not looking at for 3 weeks. Her eyes were doing that thing that children's eyes do when they're carrying something too heavy for their age. A kind of exhausted steadiness that doesn't belong on an 8-year-old face. "Mr. Jack," she said, and her voice was so quiet I had to take a step closer to hear her. "Can my mom come get warm too?" I stopped. The question was so small, so careful, like she'd been rehearsing it for a long time and was still afraid of how it would land. "Your mom," I said slowly. "Where is she?" Lily pointed toward the far end of the parking lot. I walked to the front window and looked. There was a minivan out there I'd noticed before. Old blue, one of the back panels, a slightly different shade than the rest, like it had been replaced sometime in the past and never properly color-matched. It had been in that parking lot a lot. I'd noticed it the way I notice things these days, from a distance. There was a woman in the driver's seat. She had a blanket pulled up around her shoulders. The engine was off. "How long has your mom been out there?" I asked. Lily looked at the floor. "Since she dropped me off." "That's 4 hours, Lily." She didn't say anything. "Is that her blanket, or did she bring it from somewhere?" "It's from our van," she said. "We have a lot of blankets in our van." There was a very particular way she said that. Not bragging, not complaining, just stating a fact about the world she was living in. I looked back out the window at the minivan. At the woman who had been sitting out there for 4 hours in a December storm, with the engine off, with a blanket waiting. "How long have you been sleeping in the van?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice even. Lily hesitated. She pulled at her sleeve again. "Since before Thanksgiving," she said. "Mom calls it indoor camping. She says it's an adventure." A pause. "She stays up really late. I think she's checking to make sure I'm warm enough." And there it was. The thing that punched right through the wall I'd spent 2 years building. A woman sitting in a cold parking lot for 4 hours, calling it an adventure to protect her daughter from the truth of it, staying awake through freezing nights to make sure a child didn't stop breathing in her sleep. I put my coat back on, not because I was still planning to leave, but because I was going outside. The cold hit me hard when I opened the front door, that specific kind of December cold in Cedar Falls that isn't just temperature, it's weight. The wind had an edge to it. I walked across the parking lot toward the minivan with my hands in my pockets, and I could see the woman in the driver's seat watching me the whole way. By the time I got to her window, she'd rolled it down about 4 inches. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was controlled. Carefully controlled the way a person's voice gets when they've been holding themselves together for a very long time. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-30s maybe. Dark circles under her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup. She was wearing a hospital-issued jacket over 2 sweaters, and the blanket around her shoulders was actually 2 blankets that had been tucked together at the seams with safety pins. "Your daughter is inside," I said. "I know that," she said. "I can see the window from here. She's fine." "She is," I agreed. "She's been doing homework and reading about thermocouples." I paused. "She's worried about you." Something moved across her face at that. Something she immediately shut down. "She doesn't need to be worried about me," she said. "We're fine. I have a job starting on Monday. Hospital laundry full-time. I've got a deposit saved for a motel, and I've been calling around. We just need a few more days." "It's going to be 12 below tonight," I said. She looked straight ahead through the windshield. "I know," she said. "We have blankets." "You have blankets," I said. "And the engine's been off for at least 4 hours." She said nothing. "What's your name?" I asked. A pause. Long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. "Rachel," she said. "Rachel Carter." "Jack Sullivan," I said. "This is my store." Another silence. "My daughter likes your store," Rachel said, and her voice was careful again. "I'm sorry if she's been coming in too much. I can tell her to." "She's not coming in too much," I said. "She's been doing her homework and asking good questions about water heaters." Rachel didn't smile, but something around her eyes softened for just a moment. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no." She looked at me then, directly, assessing. She had very dark eyes, and they were doing the same exhausted, steady thing her daughter's eyes did, and I understood now where Lily had learned it. "I've got a problem," I said. "Somebody in this town has decided that Sullivan's Hardware is some kind of donation center for winter supplies. Coats, heaters, blankets, fuel cards. It's all in my back room, and it's a complete disaster. I can't find anything. I don't know what I have or where it came from or who needs what." I paused. "I need somebody to organize it. I need an inventory system. I need somebody who can figure out how to get supplies to people who actually need them." Rachel stared at me. "I'm not a charity case," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. "I know that," I said. "That's why I said I need help. Not that I'm offering it." She kept staring. "The break room behind the office has heat," I said. "It's got a fold-out couch, a bathroom, a working sink. If you help me figure out this donation situation, you can use it while you're working. You and Lily." The wind shifted, even colder. "I don't know you," Rachel said. "No," I agreed. "You don't. I don't take handouts." "I know. I'm offering a job. The couch and the heat come with the job." I paused. "I'm not going to tell you it's not also because your daughter told me you've been sitting out here in the cold, and I couldn't live with myself if I just went home." Rachel said nothing for a long moment. The temperature was dropping. You could feel it happening in real time, that particular moment, when a cold night decides to become a dangerous one. "One night," she said finally. "We'll see how the work goes." She opened the car door. I waited while she gathered things from the back of the van quickly, efficiently, in the practiced way of someone who'd been doing this for weeks. A bag here, a smaller bag there. She knew exactly where everything was. She'd organized the van the way she'd probably organized everything in her life, carefully, so it didn't look like chaos even when it was. I went back inside first to get Lily. Lily was standing at the window. She'd seen the whole thing. When I came through the door, she looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Is she coming?" she asked. "She's coming," I said. And I watched something pass over Lily Carter's face, something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly. More like the releasing of a tension that had been held so long it had become invisible. Like a child setting down a weight she'd stopped noticing she was carrying. "Thank you, Mr. Jack," she said. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just said, "Let's go get your mom out of the cold." Rachel came through the door a minute later. She looked at the break room, at the folded couch with a donated quilt on it, at the bathroom with a working heater on the wall, at the small area that was about to become everything she had. She didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I had half expected her to the way people cry when something suddenly goes right after a long run of wrong. But Rachel Carter was not that kind of person. She looked at the room, she nodded once, and she said, "Where's the donation inventory? Let's see what we're working with." That was Rachel. I showed her the disaster in the back room. The boxes of unmatched gloves, the coats draped everywhere, the heaters still in their packaging, the bags of supplies with no labels. She walked through it with her arms crossed and her eyes moving steadily across everything. "You have no system at all," she said. "No," I agreed. "But you have a lot of good stuff here." Apparently. She picked up a box of children's mittens, small ones red and blue, and turned it over in her hands. "Do you know who donated these?" "No idea." "Okay." She set the box down and pulled out a notebook she'd had in her bag. "I'm going to need a few supplies. Do you have sticky labels? Markers, a folding table?" "Probably somewhere," I said. "Find them," she said. Not rudely, just directly. Like someone who'd decided that if she was going to do a job, she was going to do it right. I found the supplies. I put them on a folding table I'd pulled from the storage closet. Then I stood in the doorway of the back room and watched Rachel Carter begin building a system out of chaos with a notebook and a black marker. Lily was already asleep on the couch. She'd pulled the donated quilt up over her shoulders and curled into herself with the total abandon of a child who had finally stopped having to stay alert. I stood there longer than I needed to. Something was moving in me. Something I didn't have a name for yet and wasn't ready to examine. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something smaller and more immediate. A recognition, maybe. The sense of seeing two people who deserved more than they had, and understanding that the distance I'd kept from the world since Claire died was not wisdom. It was just cowardice that had gotten very good at sounding like peace. "Mr. Sullivan," Rachel said without looking up from her notebook. "Jack," I said. She looked up then, just briefly. "You can go home, Jack. We'll be okay tonight." "I know you will," I said. I put my coat on and went to the door. Then I stopped. "Rachel," I said. She looked up again. "That question your daughter asked me," I said. "You raised somebody very brave." She held very still for a moment. Then she looked back down at her notebook. "Go home," she said quietly. "It's cold." I went home, but I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside, looking at the dark farmhouse. 7 rooms, 2 of them heated. The door at the end of the upstairs hall that I hadn't opened in 2 years. I had convinced myself that the quiet was what I needed, that closing things off was protection, that if you don't let people in, they can't leave, and if they can't leave, you can't lose them. But Lily Carter had just dismantled that entire theory with one whispered question, because she didn't ask for herself. She asked for her mother. She sat in a warm store for hours doing homework, asking me about thermocouples, and waiting for exactly the right moment. Waiting until she was sure I was a person who might say yes, and then she asked if her mother could get warm. That is not a child who learned helplessness. That is a child who learned how to protect people. And something about the exactness of that, the quiet courage of it, cracked something open in me that I hadn't known was still capable of cracking. I went inside my house that night and I turned the heat up in 3 rooms instead of 2. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, I got to the store at 7. Rachel was already awake. She'd been working since 6, judging by the progress in the back room. She'd sorted coats by size and gender and hung them in organized rows. She'd grouped the heaters by type and rated them in order of immediate need, portable first, since those could go out same day. She'd made a list in neat columns of every item in the back room with a quantity and a condition rating. On a separate sheet, she'd written problem. She handed it to me. "These heaters are the right kind for older homes," she said. "But a lot of older residents don't know how to operate them safely. And some of the homes I'm thinking of have wiring that shouldn't have a portable heater in them at all. You hand somebody the wrong heater for the wrong house, you could start a fire. I stared at her. You figured all this out since last night, I said. I had time to think, she said. The couch comfortable enough? The couch was fine. Lily slept through till 6:30. A pause. She asked me this morning if she could stay in the store again today and read the magazines. She's welcome to, I said. Rachel nodded, looked back at her list. About the heater problem, she said. What if we actually went to people's houses? You check the wiring and make sure the setup is safe. I coordinate and communicate with the families. We can call it... She paused, like the name had just come to her. Actually, Lily named it this morning. She said if we're delivering warm, we should call it Warm Doors. And there it was. Warm Doors. Started in my back room by a woman sorting gloves by size at 6 in the morning, named by an 8-year-old girl who'd been sleeping in a minivan and somehow still had enough left over to name something beautiful. That was the beginning. Not of the program that came later, but of the thing underneath the program. The thing that neither Rachel nor I was ready to call by its real name yet. Because that morning when Rachel handed me that problem sheet with her neat columns and her careful logic, something happened that hadn't happened to me in 2 years. I felt something that wasn't grief. Something that wasn't the particular flat weight of a life being survived instead of lived. I felt interested, present, pulled forward into a day that had more in it than just endurance. I didn't say any of that. I just looked at the list. First visit should be Walter Green, I said. He's on Maple, and he called me twice about his furnace this fall. I told him to call the gas company. He probably didn't. Why not? Because Walter Green is 72 years old and too proud to admit he can't fix it himself, I said. And probably too broke to pay for the repair. Rachel picked up her notebook. Give me his number, she said. I'll call and set it up as a routine check. I looked at her. You're good at this, I said. She didn't look up from the notebook. I've had a lot of practice figuring out how to help people without making them feel small, she said quietly. I understood then that this was not just a skill. It was something she'd built from something painful, the way useful things so often are. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The day we went to Walter Green's house changed things. I knew it would. What I didn't know was how much. Walter opened the door in a flannel shirt and 2 pairs of socks and acted like everything was fine. I could see my breath in his entryway. Jack Sullivan, he said. Didn't call for any service. Routine winter check, Rachel said, stepping up beside me with a clipboard. We're visiting a few homes in the area, just making sure the heating systems are squared away before the cold front hits. Walter looked at her. Who are you? He said. Rachel Carter, she said. I coordinate for Warm Doors. Warm what? Warm Doors. We're based out of Sullivan's Hardware. She smiled, and it was a specific kind of smile, the kind that says, I see you, and I'm not here to embarrass you. May we come in? Walter let us in. His furnace had been dead for 11 days. He'd been heating his bedroom with a 1,500-watt space heater he'd had since the Reagan administration, keeping his kitchen door closed to hold in any warmth from cooking and sleeping in 2 pairs of socks and his wife's old housecoat. His wife, Dorothy, had been gone for 4 years. There were photographs of her everywhere, on every surface, in every frame, like he was trying to hold on to the shape of a life that had rearranged itself around her absence. I recognized that kind of home immediately. I lived in one. I got the furnace running with parts from the truck. Nothing dramatic. A cracked heat exchanger seal and a thermocouple that had given out the kind of repair that takes an hour if you know what you're doing. While I worked, Rachel sat with Walter at his kitchen table and talked to him about the Energy Assistance Program. The county offered how to apply, what documents he'd need, whether he had anyone who could help him with the paperwork. When I came back into the kitchen, Walter was laughing at something Rachel had said. Actually laughing, not the polite kind, but the real kind that comes from somewhere unexpected. Your furnace is running, I said. Walter looked at me. Then he looked at Rachel. Then he looked back at me and said, She's something else. She is, I agreed. Rachel looked down at her clipboard. but I saw the edge of a real smile before she looked away. We drove back to the store in my truck. Lily was there reading a magazine. The store had a couple of customers who'd come in for salt and a bag of birdseed. "How was it?" Lily asked Rachel without looking up from the magazine. "His furnace is fixed," Rachel said. "Was he alone?" A pause. "Yes." Lily nodded like this confirmed something she'd already known. "He should come have hot chocolate with us sometime," she said. And Rachel looked at her daughter, this small, serious girl who'd been sleeping in a van and still had room to notice that a lonely old man might want company. And I saw something cross Rachel's face that was harder than anything else I'd seen from her yet. Pride and grief, both at once. The specific kind of grief that comes from seeing your child be extraordinary in conditions that should never have required it. "We'll see, baby," she said softly. Lily just nodded and turned a page. That night, after Lily was asleep again and Rachel was updating her inventory sheets, I stayed later than I needed to. I told myself I was reviewing orders. I was reviewing orders the same way people do things they tell themselves they're doing for reasons that aren't the real reason. "Jack," Rachel said without looking up. "Yeah. You don't have to stay." "I know." A silence. "I'm not going to be here forever," she said. "I want you to know that. I have a plan. I've had a plan this whole time, it just got set back. But I'm going to get my own place. I'm going to get on my feet. I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "I don't want you thinking this is something it's not." I looked at her. She was still looking at her papers. "I'm not thinking it's anything," I said carefully. "I'm thinking it's cold outside, and you and your daughter are warm inside, and tomorrow I'm going to go fix another furnace." She looked up then. "What happened to you?" she asked. And her voice was different, not careful, not controlled, just direct, like she'd decided to ask the real question. I looked at the heater in the corner, the cast iron one that had been there since before I was born. "My wife died," I said. 2 years ago. She'd been sick for a while." Rachel was quiet. "We were going to adopt," I said. "She had this whole plan, yellow room upstairs, paper started." I paused. "After she died, I closed the door and didn't open it." Rachel said nothing for a long time. Then, "I'm sorry." "Thank you," I said. "Your husband." She looked back at her papers. "Andrew, 3 years ago. Accident at the plant, the one that closed." A pause. "He was a good man, a really good man, and the world just took him. And then the company closed and everything he'd worked for it all just—" She stopped, set down her pen. "And I've been trying to keep moving ever since. For Lily. Just keep moving." "You've done a remarkable job," I said. "I've been sleeping in a van," she said. "And your daughter is healthy and doing homework about thermocouples and naming community programs," I said. "That's not failure. That's the opposite of failure." Rachel looked at me for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her inventory sheets. But she didn't tell me to go home. And I sat there in the quiet of the store with the heater ticking and the snow piling up outside, and I thought about Claire and Andrew, and 2 people who'd both had the ground taken out from under them, and the particular way that grief can make you think survival and living are the same thing when they are absolutely not. I looked at the back room where Lily was asleep with the donated quilt pulled up to her chin. Lily, who asked the question. Lily, who named the thing warm doors. Lily, who told me without ever quite saying it directly that people who are cold deserve more than weather. I had spent 2 years heating only 2 rooms and calling it enough. I had spent 2 years closing doors and calling it wisdom. And in 3 weeks, a small girl with an oversized backpack and a question she'd rehearsed very carefully had walked into my store and taken an axe to all of it. I didn't know then how much harder things were about to get. I didn't know about the black SUV or the attorney's photographs or the hearing that would make everything we'd built feel like it could be undone in a single afternoon. I didn't know that Rachel was going to disappear. I didn't know I was going to have to go looking for her in a blizzard. What I knew that night in the quiet of the store was this: something had shifted. Something in me had come loose from the place where I'd jammed it. And whatever was on the other side of it, Whatever was waiting past the fear of caring again, I wasn't running from it anymore. I didn't know what to call that yet. But it felt for the first time in 2 years like something that wasn't grief. The second morning, Rachel did not ask whether she and Lily should stay another night. She just woke up before 6, made coffee in the break room with the small machine. I kept back there for late inventory nights and was already reorganizing the coat section by the time I arrived at 7:15. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She had a system now tags she'd made herself from index cards and rubber bands color-coded by size. Children's coats on the left rack, women's in the middle, men's on the right. Each section subdivided further smallest to largest. "You were here until what time last night?" I asked. 11:30, she said without turning around. "Rachel, I found 14 pairs of gloves that don't have matches," she said. "I put them in a separate bin. If more come in, we might be able to pair them up. And someone donated 3 cases of hand warmers that were buried under a tarp. Those need to go out today if possible." I looked at the hand warmers. 12 packs each, 3 cases. 36 packs total. "You have a list of who needs them," I said. She held up her notebook. There was a list. Of course there was a list. That was the second day. By the 4th day, word had started moving through Cedar Falls, the way word moves in small towns, not through announcements, not through any system, just through the particular network of people who know. People who mention something to someone at the diner or the pharmacy. Sullivan's Hardware was the place to bring things. Sullivan's Hardware was the place to go if you needed something and didn't want to feel bad about needing it. Rachel had done something I would not have thought to do. She'd put a simple sign on the front door. It said, "Donations welcome, no questions asked. All items go directly to neighbors in need." And below that in smaller letters, "If you need something, come in, we'll figure it out." That phrase, "we'll figure it out," turned out to be the most powerful thing she could have written. Because it didn't promise anything specific. It didn't say we have what you need. It said we'll figure it out together, which is the thing people actually need to hear when they're ashamed of needing anything at all. By the end of the first week, a retired schoolteacher named June came in with 4 garbage bags of winter clothes her late husband had never worn. A man named Gary, who ran the body shop on Pine Street, dropped off 3 propane tanks full. 2 teenage girls from the high school arrived on a Saturday morning with a wagon they'd filled with canned goods collected from their neighborhood. Each time someone came in, Rachel was the one who received them. She had a way of doing it that I studied because I couldn't quite understand how she made it feel so natural. She didn't gush. She didn't make people feel like heroes for donating. She just said thank you, asked their name, wrote it in the notebook, and told them specifically how the donation would be used. "These propane tanks will probably go to Mrs. Hightower on Birch, and maybe one to the Kowalski family on Route 9, she'd say, and the specificity of it did something to people. It made the giving feel real instead of symbolic. She understood something I'd never thought about, that people who donate also need to be treated with dignity. They need to feel like their contribution landed somewhere real, not disappeared into a general cloud of charity. I started paying attention to everything she did. On day 5, she came to me with the idea fully formed. "The delivery program," she said. "We need to make it official. I've been looking at the list of people who've called this week asking about heaters, and at least 6 of them are elderly residents living alone. I know from experience." She paused slightly at that phrase, like she was deciding how much to attach to it. "That people in that situation won't always ask for help directly. They'll call about a heater, but what they really need is for someone to come and check that everything's actually safe." "You want to do house visits," I said. "I want us to do house visits," she said. "You check electrical and heating systems. I coordinate and communicate. We schedule 3 or 4 a week." "That's a significant time commitment," I said. "Yes," she said. "But Walter Green's furnace was 12 days dead. 12 days. In December. That man could have—" She stopped, looked at her notebook. "If we'd gotten there 1 week later, we might not have been doing a safety check. We might have been doing something else." She didn't say the word. She didn't need to. "Lily came up with the name," I said. "She did," Rachel said, and the pride and the sadness moved across her face the same way they had before, those two things that seemed to travel together in her whenever she talked about her daughter. "Warm doors," I said. "Warm doors," she agreed. We did our first official warm doors visit that Friday. Walter again, because he'd called. The furnace was making a new sound, and he wasn't sure if that was normal. It was normal, just the system settling into regular use after the repair, but we stayed for 2 hours. Rachel sat with him at his kitchen table, while I checked every vent in the house, and when I came back through the kitchen, she had somehow gotten Walter to tell her about Dorothy, his wife. 4 years gone. He had an album out on the table that I'd never seen before, a blue one with gold lettering on the cover, and he was showing Rachel photographs. "This was our trip to Niagara Falls," Walter was saying. 1987. Dorothy insisted on the boat tour even though she hated boats. She spent the whole time white-knuckling the railing and pretending she was fine. Rachel laughed. A real laugh surprised out of her. Walter looked startled by it for a moment. Then he laughed too. I stood in the doorway with my flashlight in my hand and my toolkit at my feet, and I watched a 72-year-old man laugh at a 20-year-old memory, because a woman with dark circles under her eyes and a notebook in her bag had sat down and asked him a real question. That was warm doors in its truest form. Not the heaters, not the coats, not the fuel cards or the hand warmers or the weatherization checks. It was the sitting down, the asking, the staying long enough to let someone feel like a person and not a problem. I thought about Claire, who had wanted to do exactly this kind of thing, this reaching into the spaces where people were quietly disappearing, and I thought about how I'd agreed with her while she was alive, and then spent 2 years failing to do it after she was gone. I locked that thought down. Not yet. Not here. "Furnace sounds fine," I told Walter. He looked up from the photo album. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. System's just finding its rhythm. You'll be warm all winter." Walter nodded. He patted the album closed with one hand. Then he looked at Rachel. "You two come back," he said. It wasn't a question. "We will," Rachel said. She meant it. I could hear the meaning in it. That was day 9. On day 10, the first of 2 things happened that I didn't see coming. I was in the back room pulling inventory when Nora Bishop came in. Nora ran the front desk at the public library and knew everything that happened in Cedar Falls before it actually happened. She'd gone to school with my mother. She'd known Claire. She was one of the very few people who didn't walk on eggshells around me since the funeral, which I appreciated more than I ever told her. She looked at the organized racks, at the labeling system, at the color-coded bins, and she said, "Who did all this?" "Rachel Carter," I said. "She's been—" "I know who she is," Nora said. She turned and looked at me steadily. "Jack, do you know about the custody filing?" Everything in the room got very still. "What custody filing?" I said. Nora set her purse on the counter. "Evelyn Carter, Andrew's mother. She filed for an emergency review 3 days ago. She's claiming Rachel is creating an unstable environment for Lily." I stared at her. "Rachel's been working," I said. "She's been organizing, running deliveries, building a—" "I know that," Nora said. "I also know Evelyn hired an attorney who hired a private investigator, and I know that investigator has been sitting in a black SUV at the end of your lot for the past 2 days." I turned. Through the front, I could see the far end of the parking lot. There was, in fact, a black SUV parked near the edge. I had noticed it. I had told myself it was a customer who hadn't come in yet. My jaw tightened. "Does Rachel know?" I said. "I don't know what Rachel knows," Nora said. "I know what I know. And I know that Evelyn Carter has been telling people at her church that Rachel is unfit and that Lily needs to be with family." She paused. "I like Evelyn. I've known her for 30 years. But grief does things to people that they can't always see in themselves. And right now her grief is wearing a lawsuit." I said nothing. "You need to be careful, Jack," Nora said. "Both of you. Because what looks like kindness from inside this store might look like something else entirely in a photograph." She left. I stood at the front window and looked at the black SUV for a long time. Then I went to find Rachel. She was in the break room, helping Lily with a math worksheet. Long division. Lily had the particular expression of a child who finds long division personally offensive. "Can I talk to you?" I said. Rachel looked up. She read my face in about half a second. She was very fast at reading face. I'd already noticed that, and she said, "Lily, give me a few minutes, okay?" "I hate long division," Lily announced. "I know," Rachel said. "Do the first 3 problems, and I'll check them when I'm back." We went to the office. I closed the door. "You know about Evelyn," Rachel said. She didn't phrase it as a question. "You already knew," I said. "I got the notice 4 days ago." Her voice was even, completely even, the kind of even that takes enormous effort to maintain. 12 days until the hearing. "Rachel." "The SUV in the lot," she said. "I noticed it the first day before yesterday." She looked at her hands. "He's photographing the van, the building. He photographed Lily coming in from school yesterday." Something hot moved through me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "Because it's not your problem," she said, and her voice cracked just barely on the last word. "It is my problem," I said. "You're in my building. You're doing work that matters. Lily is. Lily is the reason Evelyn filed," she said. "Not because I'm dangerous, not because I'm neglectful, because Evelyn can't stand that Andrew's daughter is still alive and growing up and doesn't look like what Evelyn thought her life was going to be." She pressed her hands flat on the desk. "Evelyn is in pain. I understand that. I am also in pain. But she has a lawyer, and I have an eviction notice and a medical debt on my credit report, and 11 days to prove I'm not destroying my daughter." I sat down. "Tell me what you need," I said. She looked at me then, and for just a moment the control slipped. Not completely, just at the edges, like a window that's been sealed for so long you've forgotten it can open. "I need this to not destroy you," she said. "This store, your reputation. If Evelyn's attorney starts making it look like you're—" She stopped. "People in this town know you. They trusted you with your father's store. I am not going to be the reason that gets complicated." "Rachel," I said. "I am 51 years old. I have been running this store for 20 years. I am a grown man who can decide for myself what I participate in." She said nothing. "What would help with the hearing?" I said. "Let's start there. Practically, what do you need?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Documentation," she said finally. "Of the work, of the program, of the fact that I have been responsible and contributing and not—" She swallowed. "My employer is willing to write a letter. Lily's teacher has been sending notes. But the housing situation is the thing they'll use. The van, the back room here." She looked up. "A woman who is sleeping behind a hardware store in the law's view is a woman who cannot provide stable housing." "Then let's solve the housing," I said. She looked at me. "The farmhouse," I said carefully. "I have rooms that have been empty for 2 years. You would pay rent. We would have a written agreement. Independent living arrangements, full privacy. It is transitional housing, not—" I stopped. Looked for the right words. "It is not charity. It is not a romantic arrangement. It is a practical solution to a specific problem with documentation so that no one can use your housing situation against you in court." The room was very quiet. "I would need to pay actual rent," she said slowly. "Fair market rate for the room," I said. "Below it, actually, because the rooms haven't been updated in years, but documented and real." "It can't look like—" "It won't look like anything except what it is," I said. 2 adults with a written agreement and a paper trail." She looked at the wall for a very long time. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," I said. She went back to Lily and the long division. I sat in my office for a long time after that, looking at the desk. At the framed photograph of the store that had sat there since my father ran the place. At the empty chair across from mine that had been empty for 2 years. I thought about what Nora had said. About what looks like kindness from the inside. I knew, without allowing myself to fully examine it, that what I felt toward Rachel Carter was becoming something more complicated than kindness. I knew it the way you know things you're not ready to say out loud, with a certainty that lives in your body before it reaches your brain. But she was right about one thing. Whatever was developing between us could not be the foundation of her legal defense. That would put her in a position she'd already said she refused to be an indebted, obligated grateful in a way that looked like it cost her dignity. Whatever was happening between us would have to wait. That thought was harder than I expected it to be. The next morning, a Thursday, the black SUV was back. I went out to it. I don't know exactly what I was planning to do. I just knew I was done pretending I hadn't noticed. I walked across the lot in the cold and knocked on the driver's window. The man inside was about 40. Gray jacket. Camera on the seat beside him. He rolled the window down halfway. "Can I help you?" he said. "You've been parked in this lot for 3 days," I said. "This is private property. I'd like you to move on." He looked at me evenly. "Public street," he said. "Far end of the lot is not a public street," I said. "It's my lot. You can park on the street if you want, but you're done parking here." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he started the engine. "Have a good morning," he said. He moved to the street. He was parked on the street within 2 minutes, in a position with an even clearer view of the front entrance. I went back inside. Rachel was watching from the window. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "He's taking photographs of your daughter," I said. She said nothing. "Rachel, he's photographing an 8-year-old girl going to school and coming home. And you're telling me I shouldn't have—" "He'll use it," she said. "Now there's a confrontation to document. The store owner who's housing them in his back room had an altercation with the investigator." She turned away from the window. "I know how this looks. I have been watching how this looks for 11 days. I stopped. She was right. I'd acted out of anger, and she was the one who was going to pay for it. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head. "Don't apologize. Just let me handle it. I know what I'm doing." And then she proved it. She went outside. I watched through the window. She walked directly to the man in the SUV on the street side, knocked on his window, and when he rolled it down, she handed him something. A card. She said something I couldn't hear. He looked at the card. He looked at her. She said something else. She came back inside. "What did you give him?" I said. "A letter," she said. "I wrote it last night." She put her coat on the hook by the break room door. I told him my name, my employer, my employment start date, Lily's school and attendance record, and the fact that I was working at Sullivan's Hardware as a paid coordinator for a community winter assistance program. I told him everything he was going to find out anyway, and I gave it to him in writing so that when his client sees it, the story is already framed by facts instead of photographs. I stared at her. "You wrote that last night." "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "Rachel." "I have 9 days," she said. "I do not have the time or the energy to react. I can only act." She picked up her notebook. "We have 3 Warm Doors visits today. Walter called and said his neighbor Mrs. Patterson 78 lives alone. He thinks she hasn't had heat for a week. Can we add her?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "We can add her." She nodded and went to update the schedule. I watched her go. That was the moment I stopped thinking of what I felt as anything I could hold at arm's length. Because the woman walking back to her notebook and her schedule and her 9 days of organized urgency was not someone I was helping. She was someone I admired, deeply, in a way that had nothing to do with her circumstances and everything to do with who she was inside them. I knew what that meant. I also knew it was not the moment to say it. The week that followed was the most concentrated period of sustained purpose I had experienced since before Claire got sick. Warm Doors expanded faster than either of us had planned. After we helped Mrs. Patterson, whose home was so cold that her indoor plants had died, and she hadn't mentioned it to anyone because she didn't want to be a burden. Something shifted in the neighborhood. People started calling the store directly, not to donate, to request visits. A family of 5 on the south end of Cedar Falls, with a landlord who'd stopped responding to maintenance requests. An elderly man named Robert, who'd been using his kitchen stove for heat because his boiler had quit. A woman named Linda, who'd recently lost her job and whose teenage son had asthma and couldn't breathe properly in cold air. We went to all of them. Some I could fix. Some required resources. Rachel had to source energy assistance applications, emergency landlord letters, donations of specific equipment. She got on the phone and stayed on it. She called the county. She called the housing authority. She called a nonprofit she'd found through research the week before, and within 2 days had established a direct referral relationship. "Where did you learn how to do this?" I asked one evening after we'd come back from a visit and were going over notes at the store counter. She was quiet for a moment. "I learned what I needed," she said. "When Andrew died, I had to figure out a lot of things very fast. Insurance claims, bills, the medical debt." She turned a page in her notebook. "I learned that systems are only as hard as they seem before you understand them. After that, they're just steps." "You could run an organization," I said. She looked up. "I'm running one now." She wasn't wrong. On day 6, Councilwoman Diane Mercer walked into the store. I knew Diane. She served on the town council, had been on it for 12 years, and was one of those people who were so comfortable with their own authority that they often forgot others weren't. She looked around at the organized racks, the labeled bins, the sign on the door, and she said, "Is this a permitted operation?" Rachel walked out of the back room. "Rachel Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I coordinate warm doors based out of this location. It's a community winter assistance program. We're currently operating under Sullivan's Hardware's business license and coordinating with 3 county programs." Diane looked at her, then at me, then back at Rachel. "I've been hearing about this," she said. "Good things, I hope," Rachel said. "Mixed things," Diane said. "Some people think it's wonderful. Some people think it's going to become a liability for the town." "In what way?" Rachel asked. "If this becomes the de facto warming center," Diane said, "and the town's official program loses funding in the budget review next month, all of that responsibility falls on a private business." She looked at me. "That's not fair to you, Jack." "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully. "The council is reviewing the winter shelter funding," Diane continued. "There's a deficit. I'm not saying the program will be cut, but I'm saying it's possible. And if it is, then more people will come here," Rachel said, "and we'll figure it out." Diane looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite respect yet, but the beginning of a reassessment. "You're very confident for someone operating out of a hardware store back room," she said. "I'm confident because I know what this community has been contributing to this program," Rachel said. "In the last 12 days, we've received donations from 47 individuals and 3 local businesses. We've done 9 home visits. We've facilitated 8 energy assistance applications and helped source 3 emergency furnace repairs." She flipped to a page in her notebook and held it out. "Would you like the full numbers? I keep detailed records." Diane took the notebook, looked at the page, looked at Rachel. "You should come to the council meeting next week," she said. "Tell me when and where," Rachel said. Diane left 20 minutes later with a copy of Rachel's records and a visible uncertainty about what she'd expected to find here versus what she'd found. "You're going to the council meeting," I said after she was gone. "If that's where I need to go," Rachel said. "You have a custody hearing in 6 days." "I know." She put the notebook back under the counter. "I can do both." She said it so quietly, so flatly. Like doing 2 impossible things simultaneously was simply what was required, so she would do it. I looked at Lily, who was behind the counter, helping Nora sort a box of donated scarves by color. Lily had a very precise method of folding each one before placing it in the appropriate pile. She held up a green one. "Mr. Jack," she said. "This one is kind of between green and blue. What pile does it go in?" "Teal," Nora said. "Make a new pile." Lily considered this seriously. Then she put the scarf down and began a new pile. That evening, after Lily was asleep and Nora had gone home and the store was locked, Rachel came and found me in the office. She stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. "I've been thinking about the farmhouse," she said. I kept my expression neutral. "And I'll do it," she said. "But I need the agreement to be real. Actual rent, actual terms, actual everything. And," she paused, "I need you to understand that if things go wrong, if the hearing goes badly, If Evelyn gets what she wants. I need to know that none of that falls back on you. Rachel. Promise me, she said. And her voice had an edge to it that wasn't anger. It was something closer to desperation held very tightly. I can't promise you outcomes I don't control, I said. But I can promise you that whatever happens, I'll still be standing here. On the same side I'm standing on now. She looked at me for a long moment. That's going to have to be enough, she said. It'll be enough, I said. She nodded once, went back to the break room. I sat in the office and looked at the desk, at the empty chair, at the photograph of the store. 3 days later, I drove Rachel and Lily to the farmhouse for the first time. Rachel walked through the rooms without saying much, cataloging everything with her eyes, in that precise, quiet way she had. Lily was the opposite. She went room to room with the open-mouthed urgency of a child for whom every new space was a discovery. This one, Lily said, stopping in the doorway of the guest room at the end of the hall. This one is the right one. It had a window that looked out over the backyard. The walls were pale blue. It was one of the rooms Claire had talked about once in a different context, with a different future in mind. That works for me, Rachel said carefully. I stood at the end of the hallway and watched them and kept my face very still. 2 days before the hearing, the second thing happened that I hadn't seen coming. Rachel was gone when I arrived at the store. Not just gone from the break room. The van was gone from the lot. Her notebook was on the counter. Her coat was missing. Lily's school bag was gone. And there was a folded piece of paper on the counter with my name on it. I knew before I opened it. I stood there holding it for a moment with the weight of it already in my chest. Then I unfolded it and read. Her handwriting was small and precise the way everything about her was small and precise when she was trying to hold herself together. She wrote Jack. Thank you for everything you've done. I mean that more than I know how to say properly. But I've been watching The Investigator, and I've been thinking about what Evelyn's attorney is going to do with the photographs and the story of the hardware store and the farmhouse and the man who helped us. And I realized that every step I take that involves you is a step that might cost you something. The store, your reputation, the program. I cannot do that to you. I cannot let my problems become your problems. People who stand beside me eventually lose something. I won't let that be you. Please don't search for us. We'll be okay. And then at the bottom, in a different pen, like she'd added it later. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the counter, and I stood there for a moment in the empty store, and I felt the specific sensation of a door closing. Not being closed by me this time. Being closed by someone else from the other side for reasons they thought were noble. Rachel had run because she was trying to protect me. She had disappeared because she thought her presence was a danger to what I'd built. And because 3 years of surviving alone had convinced her that love, or whatever we were carefully not calling it, was a liability rather than a resource. She was wrong. But I also knew she was out there somewhere in December with an 8-year-old girl 2 days before a custody hearing in a van whose battery had been struggling for a week. I called Nora. I know where she is, Nora said before I could finish explaining. There's an abandoned campground at Miller's Lake. 3-4 families have been parking out there in the rough weather. It's where people go when they have nowhere else to go and don't want to be found. It's 12 degrees tonight, I said. I know that, Nora said. Call Walter, I said. I'm calling the fire department. I picked up Rachel's note and read the last line again. I'm sorry. And then I picked up my keys and walked out into the cold. Nora had said Miller's Lake like it was a simple fact, and Jack had taken it that way, right up until he turned off the main road onto the service track that led toward the water and understood immediately that simple was the wrong word for any of this. The road hadn't been plowed, hadn't been touched from the look of it since before the last storm. Jack's truck pushed through the first 50 yards on momentum and stubbornness, and then the drifts started getting serious, and he had to lean forward over the wheel, like that would somehow help, like his body weight pressed against the windshield would make the road more passable. He called Walter while he drove. Walter picked up on the second ring. I'm already in my coat, Walter said. Tell me where. Miller's Lake Service Road off County Route 12, Jack said. Don't try to drive it. I'll get as far as I can and walk the rest. Just make sure someone knows where we are." "Fire department's already rolling," Walter said. Nora called Phil Garrett directly. "He owes her a favor from something in 1987 that nobody will explain to me." "Good," Jack said. "Jack." Walter's voice dropped. "Is she, do you think she's—" "I don't know," Jack said. "That's why I'm moving fast." He got another quarter-mile before the truck couldn't go further. The drift across the road was hip-high and solid. He left the engine running, the lights on, took the emergency blanket from behind the seat and the flashlight from the glove compartment, and got out into 15 below wind chill that hit him like a physical thing, like the cold had hands. He started walking. The thing about real cold, not uncomfortable. Cold. Not "I should have worn a heavier jacket" cold, but actual dangerous cold, is that it doesn't feel like a threat at first. It feels like pressure. Like the air itself has weight, and it's pushing against every exposed surface of your skin with steady, deliberate force. Jack had grown up in Cedar Falls. He knew this cold. He knew that the danger of it was exactly that it felt survivable right up until it didn't. Rachel had been out here with a dead battery and one blanket. He moved faster. The flashlight picked up the tire tracks. First faint impressions in the packed snow of the service road, almost filled in by drifting. He followed them. His boots were good, but the drifts came up past his knees in places, and he was 51 years old and not exactly running marathons, and there was a particular quality to this walk that reminded him of nightmares, the kind where you're moving as fast as you can and covering almost no ground. He kept moving. The van appeared at the edge of the flashlight beam, like a shape emerging from static. Dark blue, barely distinguishable from the surrounding dark, buried to its door handles in snow. The exhaust pipe was almost completely covered. If there'd been any carbon monoxide danger, it had passed. The engine was off. Everything was off. The van was dark and still and silent in a way that made Jack's chest tighten, with a fear he hadn't let himself feel until this exact moment. He reached the van and knocked hard on the driver's window. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. A movement inside. Slow. Then Rachel's face appeared at the glass, and even through the frosted window, he could see the particular look of someone who has been fighting sleep for hours and is losing. She rolled the window down 2 inches. The effort of it was visible. "Jack," she said. Her voice was thick. "How did you—" "Is Lily awake?" he said. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "She's—" Rachel turned. "Lily. Lily, honey." Silence from the back of the van. Jack had the door open before Rachel finished the sentence. The back of the van was organized the way Rachel organized everything. Blankets layered in a specific order. The warmest ones, innermost. The lighter ones on top, to trap the air. Lily was in the center of all of it, her face barely visible, her color wrong in a way that Jack saw immediately, and that turned everything in his body to urgency. "Lily," he said. He reached in and touched her cheek. Cold. Too cold. Lily opened her eyes. Barely. They tracked to him slowly, like focusing cost something. "Mr. Jack," she said. Her voice was distant, thin, a voice being used from a long way away. "I've got you," he said. "Hold on." He gathered her up, blankets and all, and she was light, far too light, with the particular frightening lightness of a child who has stopped generating warmth. He pressed her against his chest and turned. Rachel was out of the van, now standing in the snow, and she was barely standing. She had the 2-blanket setup still pinned around her shoulders, and her legs were shaking in a way that wasn't voluntary. "Can you walk?" Jack said. "Yes," she said. "Rachel." "I can walk," she said. And there was a fierceness to it, even now, even barely upright in 15 below wind chill. Rachel Carter was not going to be carried. "How far?" "Quarter-mile to the truck," he said. "Fire department is coming in from the main road." She nodded. Put 1 foot forward, then another. He kept Lily pressed to his chest and walked beside Rachel and did not touch her because he understood that her ability to keep moving was connected to her ability to believe she was doing it herself, and that if he reached out and held her up, she might stop fighting, and he needed her to keep fighting. "Talk to me," he said. "About what?" she said. "Anything." A pause. Her breath came in short, visible puffs. "I made a mistake," she said. "We can talk about that later." "No," she said. "I need to say it now. While I'm still—" She paused. "While I still feel it clearly." Another step. "I ran because I was scared. Not because it was the right thing. Because I was scared, and I convinced myself that scared and right were the same thing." Jack said nothing. He kept walking. He kept Lily against his chest. "She asked me 3 times if we could go back to the store," Rachel said. "On the way here, she asked me 3 times and I said no, and she stopped asking, and I could hear her." Her voice broke for the first time. Not the controlled, almost breaking he'd seen before. Actually broke. "I could hear her trying not to cry so I wouldn't feel bad." Lily stirred slightly in Jack's arms. "Mom," she said, very quietly. "I'm right here, baby," Rachel said immediately. "I'm right here." "Are we going home?" Lily asked. Rachel stumbled. Jack caught her arm without thinking, and she grabbed his jacket with one hand and let him hold her for exactly 3 steps before she found her footing again and straightened. "Yes," Rachel said. Her voice was steady again. The steadiness cost her something visible, but she paid it. "We're going home." The fire department's lights appeared through the trees ahead, red and white sweeping the dark in slow rotations. Phil Garrett met them 20 yards from the truck, took one look at Lily, and had a thermal blanket around her before Jack had finished explaining. Walter was there. Jack hadn't expected Walter. The old man had somehow gotten a neighbor to drive him out, and he was standing at the edge of the cleared area in his heaviest coat, with a thermos in each hand. And when Rachel appeared at the edge of the light, he walked directly to her and put one of the thermoses in her hands without a word. Rachel looked at him. "Drink it," Walter said. "It's real coffee, not the powdered garbage." Rachel laughed. It came out broken and surprised, and then she pressed the thermos against her chest and took a breath that sounded like it reached all the way down. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Walter said. "You fixed my furnace." Phil Garrett had the rescue van warmed up. He got Lily in first, then Rachel, then looked at Jack with the particular expression of a man assessing damage. "She needs to be checked," Phil said quietly. "Both of them, the girl especially." "I know," Jack said. "You were maybe 30 minutes, Phil said. "Maybe less. That battery had been dead for a while." Jack absorbed that, didn't let it show in his face. "Let's go," he said. The clinic was on the north end of town, 15 minutes away. Dr. Annalise Chen had been called ahead and was waiting. She took Lily first. That was the right call, and Rachel understood it, though the moment Lily disappeared behind the curtain. Rachel sat down in the plastic chair beside the door and put her face in her hands and stayed there. Jack sat beside her. I didn't say anything. He didn't tell her it would be okay because he wasn't certain it would be, and he'd made a private decision sometime in the last 3 weeks that he was not going to tell Rachel Carter things he wasn't sure of, just to make the moment easier. She didn't need easy. She needed true. So he sat beside her in the plastic chair, and he waited. After 4 minutes he counted them. Rachel lowered her hands. "The investigator was there today," she said. "At the campground. I saw his car on the road." Jack went very still. "He followed you. Or he found me," she said. "Either way, he has photographs of the campground, of the van buried in the snow." She looked at the curtain where Lily had disappeared. "Of the fire departing to find us." Her voice was flat and precise and completely destroyed underneath that flatness. "I handed Evelyn's attorney exactly what he needs. I took my daughter somewhere dangerous because I was afraid of looking dangerous." "Rachel, I know what I did," she said. "I need you to not tell me it's going to be fine." "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay. You made a bad decision because you were scared," he said. "That doesn't erase the 100 good decisions you made to keep her alive." She stared at him. Then something happened that Jack had not seen before and would not forget. Rachel Carter, who had held herself together through eviction and debt and 3 years of solo survival, and an investigator photographing her parking lot, and a custody filing, and 15 below wind chill. Rachel Carter let herself cry. Not politely, not quietly. The way a person cries when they've been holding it back for so long that the release is almost violent, ugly, honest. The kind of crying that has nothing to do with what anyone watching might think. Jack put his hand on her shoulder. She grabbed his jacket with both hands and pressed her forehead against his shoulder and cried for a long time. He said nothing. He sat there and let her. When she finally pulled back, she didn't look away from him the way he'd expected. She looked directly at him, red-eyed and completely unguarded. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to let someone." She stopped. Andrew was the person who... She stopped again. "I haven't let anyone." "I know," Jack said. "You can't know," she said. "I know the part where you decide that needing help is the same as being defeated," he said. "I know that part very well." She looked at him. "Claire," she said. "After Claire," he said. "I didn't just close the door to one room, I closed most of them. I heated 2 rooms, and I called it living." He paused. "You walked into my store and you've been opening doors ever since. I'm not sure you even know you've been doing it." Rachel looked at her hands. "The hearing is in 2 days," she said. "I know." "He has photographs." "I know," Jack said. "And I've been making phone calls." She looked up. "What?" "Since this morning," he said. "Since I found your note." He met her eyes. "Lily's teacher. Your supervisor. Walter. Nora. 8 families that Warm Doors helped this month. I've been calling people all day." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because you were building a case," he said. "You've been building it for 3 weeks without calling it that. Every appointment documented. Every donation recorded. Every home visit logged. You gave me the evidence. I just made the calls." The curtain moved. Dr. Chen stepped through. "She's going to be fine," she said, immediately reading Rachel's face before Rachel could ask. "Mild hypothermia. Her core temperature is up and responding well. She's awake and asking for hot chocolate, and she told me very seriously that she knows what a thermocouple is." Rachel put her face in her hands again, but this time she was laughing. Jack felt something unknot in his chest. They brought Lily out 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of cocoa that the clinic nurse had produced from somewhere. Lily looked at Jack with those serious, steady eyes and said, "I left my notebook at the store." "It's there," Jack said. "It's safe." Lily nodded. "Good. I have the list of families we still need to visit." Rachel made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Baby," she said. "We have 3 more on the list," Lily said. "Mrs. Patterson's neighbor and the family on Route 9 and Mr. Robert." "We'll get them," Jack said. "All of them." Lily leaned back against her mother and closed her eyes, entirely satisfied. The ride back to Cedar Falls was quiet. Lily fell asleep within 5 minutes, her head on Rachel's shoulder. Rachel stayed awake. She sat in the passenger seat of Jack's truck and watched the road and didn't speak for a long time. Then, "What did they say?" "The people you called. Lily's teacher. Mrs. Holloway has been documenting her attendance and her grades since September," Jack said. "Perfect attendance. Grades improving every week. Mrs. Holloway said, and I'm quoting directly, that Lily is one of the most emotionally intelligent students she has taught in 20 years. Rachel was quiet. "Your supervisor at the hospital confirmed full-time start date, described your work in the first week as exceptional, and offered to appear in person at the hearing if needed." More quiet. "Walter collected 11 statements. 11 Rachel. From families we visited. He called them himself, drove to 2 of them in person. These are people who wrote in their own words what you did for them. Not what the program did. What you specifically did, and how you did it." Rachel's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Walter did that." "Walter has been on the phone since noon," Jack said. "He also contacted a housing nonprofit, Cedar Valley Housing Solutions, and they've agreed to guarantee your deposit on an apartment the moment you're ready to sign." She turned to look at him. "Why would they do that?" Because Nora called them, Jack said. And apparently Nora is very persuasive when she's motivated. Rachel looked back at the road. And the farmhouse offer, Jack said carefully. It still stands, as transitional housing with a written agreement, until you're ready for the apartment. It's not a permanent arrangement. It's just a place that's warm and documented and yours under a legal agreement, which is the only thing that matters for the hearing. Rachel said nothing for almost a full minute. You did all of this today, she said. While you were having a bad day, he said simply. She turned and looked at him fully. Jack? You would have done the same, he said. You did do the same. For Walter, for Mrs. Patterson, for the family on Route 9. You showed up. That's what this is. People showing up. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the road. I'm going to need to tell the truth at the hearing, she said. All of it. The van, the campground tonight. All of it. Yes, Jack said. Evelyn's attorney is going to make it sound like a pattern of poor judgment. Yes, Jack said again. And I'm going to stand there and describe every application I submitted, and every double shift I worked, and every night I stayed awake to make sure she was warm. Yes. And then, Rachel said, whatever they decide, I have to live with it. Jack kept his eyes on the road. Whatever they decide, you will not be alone in it. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. And with Rachel Carter, Jack had learned that was the same as agreement. They got back to the farmhouse just after midnight. Jack carried Lily inside without waking her. The girl had a gift for deep sleep once she felt safe, and Rachel got her settled into the blue room while Jack turned every heater in the place up to full and stood in the kitchen with his hands flat on the counter and let himself feel just for a moment the full weight of the night. He had been afraid. He hadn't let himself fully acknowledge it until now in the empty kitchen with the heaters ticking and the sound of Rachel's footsteps moving quietly in the room above. He had been genuinely afraid out there in the dark with the flashlight and the hip-deep drifts and the silent van. Afraid of being 30 minutes too late. Afraid of finding something he couldn't fix. He stayed in the kitchen until Rachel came downstairs. She looked exhausted in a way that went past the body. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been fighting very hard for a very long time and is only now in a moment of safety, allowing themselves to feel how tired they are. She sat down at the kitchen table. Jack made coffee. Not because it was the right hour for coffee. It was past midnight, but because it was something to do with his hands, and because Rachel needed something hot and real. He put a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask, he said. At the hearing, she said. If they ask you to describe what you and I are to each other. She looked up from the mug. What do you say? Jack looked at her. It was a precise and careful question. Entirely like her. She wasn't asking him to define their relationship. In some romantic sense, she was asking what story would be told in a room where the story mattered legally, morally, in terms of how a judge would see it and what it would mean for Lily. I say the truth, Jack said. That you are a professional I hired to coordinate a community program. That we are friends I think is accurate. That whatever else might be the case is between us and is not relevant to your capacity as a mother, which is exceptional. She studied him. You think we're friends, she said. I think we might be more than that, he said carefully. But I also think that's something that should be decided by the two of us, on a day that isn't 2 days before a custody hearing in the middle of what has been the worst winter of your life. She looked at him for a long moment. You're very careful with words, she said. Claire used to tell me the same thing, he said. She usually meant it as a complaint. Rachel almost smiled. I don't mean it as a complaint. She lifted the mug and drank. The next morning, the day before the hearing, 3 things happened. First, Rachel's attorney, a woman named Linda Park, who worked with a low-income legal aid organization in the next county, and who had been referred by the housing nonprofit, came to the farmhouse and spent 4 hours going over the case. She was small and precise, and asked questions the way a surgeon makes incisions exactly placed, no wasted motion. She reviewed Rachel's documentation. She reviewed Jack's statements. She reviewed the letters Walter had collected, When she finished, she set the file down and said, "You've built a strong case. The campground situation is going to come up." "I know," Rachel said. "How do you want to handle it?" "Honestly," Rachel said. Linda looked at her. "Define honestly." "I made a bad decision because I was scared," Rachel said. "I'm going to say exactly that. And then I'm going to explain every good decision I made before it and after it." Linda considered this. That's riskier than a straightforward defense. "I know," Rachel said. "But Lily told the truth to a judge 2 weeks ago when she talked to her teacher about living in the van. She told the truth because she's 8 years old, and she hasn't learned yet that the truth can be used against you." She paused. "I'm not going to be less honest than my 8-year-old." Linda was quiet. "Okay," she said finally. "We go with the truth. All of it." The second thing that happened was that Evelyn Carter called. Rachel was alone in the kitchen when her phone rang. She looked at the number for 3 full seconds before she answered. "Rachel," Evelyn said. Her voice was formal, controlled. "I heard about last night." "I'm sure you did," Rachel said. "Is Lily?" "She's fine," Rachel said. "She's upstairs. She's asking about the families we still need to visit on the warm doors list." A silence. "Rachel," Evelyn said. She stopped. Started again. "I need you to know that I am not doing this because I think you are a bad person." "I know that," Rachel said. "I'm doing it because—" Another stop. The sound of someone composing themselves on the other end. "She looks so much like Andrew. Every time I see her, I see him. And I can't—" The voice tightened. "I can't watch her go through difficulty. I can't watch Andrew's daughter experience hardship. I need her to be safe. And I thought that if I could—" "Evelyn," Rachel said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I understand your grief. I share it. Andrew was my husband and I loved him, and I will never stop missing him." She paused. "But you are trying to take his daughter from the person who has kept her safe and loved and warm and attending school with perfect attendance and improving grades for 3 years. And I need you to understand that taking Lily from me does not bring Andrew back. It just takes something else from both of us." The line was very quiet. "I know," Evelyn said. "It came out very small." "Come see her on an ordinary day," Rachel said. "No lawyers, no investigators, no hearings. Just come and have dinner and be her grandmother." Evelyn didn't speak for a long moment. "The hearing is tomorrow," she said finally. "I know," Rachel said. I'll think about what you said." "That's all I'm asking," Rachel said. She hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, with her hand still on the phone. Then she went to the foot of the stairs. "Lily," she called. "Yeah." From upstairs. "Your grandmother called. She asked about you." A pause. "Is she coming to get me?" Lily's voice was careful in that way it got when she was managing something larger than she wanted to show. "No, baby," Rachel said. "She just wanted to make sure you were okay." Another pause. "Okay," Lily said. Then, a moment later. "Mom, can we go check on Mr. Robert today? He's still on the list." Rachel looked at Jack, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Yeah," she said. "We can do that." The third thing that happened that day was the thing none of them expected. Walter Green showed up at the farmhouse at 4 in the afternoon with a folded piece of paper and a look on his face that was equal parts satisfaction and something more careful. "What is this?" Jack said, taking the paper. "Read it," Walter said. Jack read it. It was a statement. 2 pages handwritten from Councilwoman Diane Mercer. Not about warm doors, or not only about warm doors. About Rachel. About what she had built in 3 weeks with a notebook and a borrowed break room, and a belief that help should be given in a way that protected dignity. About what that said about the kind of person she was and the kind of mother she was likely to be. Jack looked at Walter. "How did you get Diane Mercer to write this?" "I went to her office," Walter said simply. "I told her what happened last night. I told her who Rachel Carter is. And then I told her that if there was any chance a judge didn't understand, that it was partly because the people in this town hadn't done enough to make it clear." Jack was quiet. She wrote it in 20 minutes, Walter said. Said she'd been thinking about Rachel since that day in the store when she held out the notebook. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd been listening. She looked down at Walter. "You drove here yourself," she said. "My neighbor drove me," Walter admitted. "In the cold." "I've been in colder," Walter said. Lily studied him with those serious eyes. Then she said, "Mr. Walter, would you like to stay for dinner?" Walter looked at Jack, then at Rachel. "I would like that very much," he said. They ate around the farmhouse table. Rachel, Jack, Lily, and Walter told stories about Dorothy and Cedar Falls in the 60s and 70s, and Lily asked him questions with the precision she'd applied to the thermocouple diagrams, and Rachel sat at the end of the table and ate and listened, and Jack watched her and thought about the yellow room and the door that had been closed for 2 years, and the particular way that life, when you stop fighting it, has a way of filling the spaces you thought were permanently empty. I didn't say any of that. He passed the bread and listened to Lily ask Walter about Dorothy's recipe for apple cake, which Walter apparently knew by heart, and the warmth of the kitchen was something entirely different from the warmth of 2 heated rooms. After dinner, Walter's neighbor came to get him. He stood at the door with his coat on and his hat in his hands, and he looked at Rachel. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "You'll do fine," he said. "You're a truthful person. Judges like truthful people." "I hope you're right," she said. "I usually am," Walter said. And for the first time since Jack had known him across years of furnace repairs and winter supply deliveries and one unforgettable kitchen conversation with a photograph album. Walter Green winked. Rachel laughed, really laughed. After he left, Lily put on her pajamas and came downstairs to say goodnight. She stood in the kitchen doorway, in her socks and her too big sleep shirt, and she looked at Jack. "Are you scared for tomorrow?" she asked him. "A little," Jack said honestly. She nodded like this was the right answer. "Mom says being scared means you care about the right things." "Your mom is very smart," Jack said. Lily considered this. "She's the smartest person I know," she said in a matter-of-fact tone that left no room for argument. "Even smarter than Mrs. Holloway, and she knows 7 languages." "Good night, Lily," Rachel said from behind her. "Good night," Lily said. She looked at Jack one more time. "Mr. Jack, you're going to be there tomorrow, right?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to be right there." She nodded again, satisfied. She went upstairs. Jack and Rachel stayed in the kitchen. The house settled around them, that particular sound of an old house at night, the contracting of wood in the cold, the tick of the radiator, the sound of wind at the windows. "Jack," Rachel said. "Yeah, whatever happens tomorrow." She paused. "Whatever the judge decides, I need you to know that what you did today, all of it, the calls, the statements, Walter, all of it." She stopped. "I have been alone for 3 years. I got very good at it. I convinced myself it was strength." She looked at her hands. "Tonight is the first time since Andrew died that I sat at a table and felt like the world wasn't ending." She paused again longer. "I don't know exactly what that means yet, but I wanted you to know." Jack looked at her. "I sat in a cold house for 2 years and called it surviving," he said. "And then your daughter asked me a question, and I started turning the heat up." He paused. "I know what it means." She held his gaze. Neither of them said anything else. But the kitchen was warm, and outside the December wind was doing what it did, and upstairs Lily Carter was sleeping in a blue room she had chosen herself, in a house where nobody had to pretend they were warm. The hearing was the next morning, and all of them separately and together were as ready as they were ever going to be. The morning of the hearing came in cold and gray, the way important days in Cedar Falls almost always did in December, as if the weather itself understood that something was about to be decided and had dressed accordingly. Rachel was up before 5. Jack heard her moving downstairs, the particular careful footsteps of someone trying not to wake the house, and he lay in the dark for a moment, listening to the sounds of the kitchen, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening and closing water, running the specific click of the coffee maker, finding its rhythm. He got up at 5:15 and came downstairs and found her standing at the counter in her work clothes, the good ones, the dark gray blouse and the black slacks she'd pressed the night before, with a mug in both hands, and her eyes fixed on something past the window that wasn't visible from where she stood. She heard him on the stairs and turned. She looked at him with eyes that had not slept, not really, but that were clear and focused in a way that meant she'd made some decision in the night and had arrived at the morning on the other side of it. "Coffee's ready," she said. "I can see that," Jack said. He poured himself a mug and stood beside her at the counter, not across from her, beside her. He'd thought about that positioning for about half a second before doing it, and then he'd stopped thinking about it. For a few minutes, they just stood there. The kitchen was warm. The heaters were running. Outside, the wind was moving in the way it did when another system was building, and Jack could feel in the way that people who've lived in a place all their lives can feel weather, that the day was going to get worse before it got better. "Linda called last night after you went up," Rachel said. "I heard your voice," Jack said. "Couldn't hear what she said." She heard from Evelyn's attorney. Rachel looked into her mug. "He's going to lead with the campground, the photographs from that night. He has 3: the van buried in the snow, the fire department vehicle, and one of me being helped to the rescue vehicle." She paused. "Linda says he'll frame it as a pattern of reckless decision-making." Jack said nothing. "She also says," Rachel continued, "that our documentation is the strongest she's seen in a case of this kind. She has been doing family law for 14 years. She looked up. "She said that twice, like she wanted to make sure I heard it." "You heard it," Jack said. "I heard it," Rachel said. "I'm choosing to believe it." Jack nodded. "Good choice." Lily came downstairs at 6:30 in her school clothes, which she'd laid out herself the night before. She ate breakfast with the focused silence of a child who understood that today was different without being told specifically why. She drank her orange juice. She ate her toast. She put her plate in the sink. Then she looked at Rachel. "Mom," she said, "I want to go." Rachel set down her mug. "Lily, I know what the hearing is," Lily said. This was said with the particular patience of an 8-year-old who has been trying to manage the information gap between herself and the adults around her for a very long time. "I know Grandma Evelyn is asking a judge about where I live. I know that's what today is." She held her mother's gaze steadily. "I want to go." The room was very quiet. "Baby," Rachel said carefully. "The courthouse. I want to tell the judge that I'm okay," Lily said, "because I am. And I think he should hear it from me." Rachel looked at Jack. Jack looked at Rachel. He didn't say anything. This was not his decision, and he knew it, and he stayed out of it, the way you stay out of the exact space where a mother is deciding something about her child. Rachel turned back to Lily. She studied her daughter's face for a long moment. The serious eyes, the set jaw, the particular expression that Lily got when she had already made up her mind and was presenting the decision to you as a courtesy. "You'd have to talk to the judge," Rachel said. "Privately, without me in the room." "That's okay," Lily said. "I know what I want to say." "What do you want to say?" Lily thought about it for a moment. Then, that you always stayed. Even when everything was hard. You always stayed. Rachel pressed her lips together. She turned her face slightly away for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back. "Okay," she said. "Get your coat." Linda Park was waiting for them at the Cedar Falls Community Hall, which was where the hearing had been moved when the courthouse lost power the previous evening due to the storm. The building was also where the town council was scheduled to hold its budget vote that same afternoon, which meant the lobby was already filling with the particular mixture of people that civic proceedings attract: attorneys in good coats, council staff with folders, a local news reporter who recognized the convergence of 2 significant events and had planted herself near the entrance with a notepad. Linda looked at Lily and then at Rachel with a question in her expression. "She wants to speak," Rachel said. Linda considered this for exactly the time it took to assess the situation. "Judges in family cases do sometimes allow child testimony in private," she said. "Lily is 8, which is young, but she is clearly—" She looked at Lily again. "Articulate." "She knows what a thermocouple is," Jack offered. Linda looked at him. I don't know what that means, but it sounds relevant. She crouched down to Lily's level. Lily, if you speak to the judge, he's going to ask you questions. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer. You just have to tell the truth. Can you do that? Yes, Lily said simply. Okay, Linda said. She straightened up. Let's go in. Evelyn Carter was already inside. She was sitting on the far side of the room with her attorney, a man named Greer, 50s, expensive suit, the kind of man who wore confidence as an accessory, and two other women Jack didn't recognize, who were probably there for support. Evelyn looked older than the last time Jack had seen her, which had been only in photographs Rachel had shown him. She was a small woman with silver hair cut close and careful, and she was wearing a dark blue dress and sitting very straight in her chair, with her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked at Rachel when they came in. Rachel looked back at her. Neither woman looked away for a long moment. Then Evelyn looked at Lily, and something moved across her face. That thing she'd described on the phone. The specific grief of seeing Andrew in his daughter's face, and she looked quickly away. Lily watched her grandmother with those steady eyes. She didn't wave. She didn't look away either. The judge was a man named Howard Bellamy, 62, who had been on the family court bench for 18 years, and who had, according to Linda, a reputation for two things: not being impressed by expensive attorneys and asking questions nobody expected. He came in at 9 sharp, sat down, arranged his papers, and looked at the room. It's cold, he said, and the heat in this building is unreliable, so let's be efficient. He looked at Greer. Counselor, you have filed an emergency custody petition on behalf of Evelyn Carter. You have 20 minutes. Begin. Greer stood. How was good? Jack would give him that. He had a manner that was almost conversational, like he was just walking everyone through a set of obvious facts that any reasonable person would agree were concerning. He described Rachel's eviction. He described the vehicle residency. He described the break room at Sullivan's Hardware, which he called twice a commercial storage space. He put the campground photographs on the table. 3 photographs. The van in the snow. The fire department lights. Rachel being helped to the vehicle. Your Honor, Greer said, we are not suggesting that Ms. Carter is a cruel parent. We are suggesting that her circumstances have created an objectively unstable and at times dangerous environment for an 8-year-old child. The petitioner, Mrs. Carter, can provide stable housing, financial security, and family continuity for her granddaughter. He sat down. Judge Bellamy looked at the photographs for a moment, then he looked up. Ms. Park, he said. Linda stood. Your Honor, she said, I'd like to begin with a question. She paused. When we look at these photographs, what are we actually seeing? Greer shifted slightly. We're seeing a mother who made one frightened decision in the context of 3 years of consistently excellent parenting, Linda said. And we're seeing a community that mobilized within hours to make sure her daughter was safe. She opened her folder. I'd like to enter into evidence the following documents. She went through them one by one. Rachel's employment confirmation, start date, full-time status, and her supervisor's written statement. Lily's school attendance record, perfect from September through December. Lily's teacher's letter. 11 family statements from Warm Doors recipients. Councilwoman Diane Mercer's statement. The rental agreement between Rachel Carter and Jack Sullivan for the farmhouse rooms, signed, dated with full terms documented. And a letter from Cedar Valley Housing Solutions, confirming their willingness to guarantee Rachel's deposit on an apartment the moment she chose to sign. Judge Bellamy read each document. He was not a fast reader. He was a thorough one. While he read, the room was very quiet. Jack watched Rachel. She sat very still, the way she'd sat that first night beside the heater in his store. Controlled. Composed. Carrying something heavy and not letting it show in how she held herself. He wanted to reach over and put his hand over hers. He didn't. This was her moment to be who she was, and she needed to be it alone. Judge Bellamy finished reading. He looked up at Rachel. Ms. Carter, he said, I'd like to hear from you directly. Not your attorney. You. Linda sat down without being asked. Rachel stood. She stood the way she did everything, directly, without ceremony, without the kind of performed humility that people sometimes thought judges wanted to see. She stood like a person who had nothing to perform because she had decided to simply be exactly what she was. "Your Honor," she said, "I'm going to tell you the truth, all of it, because the alternative is that you make a decision based on the worst photograph of my life, and I think you and my daughter both deserve better than that." The room was very still. Rachel spoke for 14 minutes. Jack timed it without meaning to. She described Andrew's death plainly without dramatizing it. The accident and the insurance and the medical bills and the plant closure, and what all of that meant financially for a woman with a young child in a town where the economy had just taken a catastrophic blow. She described the apartment applications 43, she said, and she named the reasons each one was rejected: the income threshold, and the credit check, and the co-signer requirement, and the landlord who'd said he preferred tenants without children. She described the van. She described the blankets and the safety pins and the routine she'd built so that Lily was warm and fed and at school every single morning. Then she stopped. "I also need to tell you about the campground," she said, "because that is the most important part, and I need to say it myself before anyone else characterizes it." She paused. "I made a bad decision. I was afraid that the people trying to help me were going to be hurt by helping me. I was afraid that the man who had given us safe housing and work was going to lose something because of his association with us. And so I left. I took my daughter somewhere I thought was safer than staying." She looked down at the table for just a moment, then back up. "I was wrong. My fear made me dangerous. And Lily came closer to being seriously hurt by my fear than she ever came close to being hurt by our circumstances." She paused again. "I am telling you this not because I want you to pity me for admitting a mistake. I'm telling you because I need you to know that I understand what I did and why it was wrong, and that understanding is not possible in a person who doesn't love their child enough to tell the truth about themselves." The room held the silence for a moment. Then Judge Bellamy said, "Thank you, Ms. Carter." He made a note. "I'd like to speak with Lily now." Greer started to rise. "Your Honor, the child is 8 years old. If we're to give weight to her—" "I've been doing this for 18 years, Judge Bellamy said pleasantly. "I'll be the one to determine what weight to give." He looked at Rachel. "Ms. Carter, a private conversation, 5 minutes." Rachel nodded. She looked at Lily, who was sitting beside Jack. Lily was already standing. She straightened her coat. She looked at her mother. "I know what to say," she said. Rachel put her hand briefly on the top of Lily's head, just for a moment. Then she stepped back. Lily walked across the room to Judge Bellamy's table with the particular solemnity of a child who has decided this is serious and is treating it accordingly. She sat in the chair that the bailiff pulled out for her. She folded her hands on the table. The bailiff drew a curtain across that section of the room. The 5 minutes that followed were the longest of the proceeding. Rachel sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her, and her eyes on the curtain, and her face doing that controlled thing, that enormous effort of control. Jack watched her. He didn't look at Greer or at Evelyn or at the curtain. He watched Rachel because she was the person in the room who needed the most and was asking for the least. He thought about the note she'd left him. "People who stand beside me eventually lose something." He thought about all the ways she'd tried to protect him by removing herself from the equation, and all the ways that trying to protect someone by disappearing from their life is the most elegant and most heartbreaking way of undervaluing what you are to them. I was going to tell her that. Later. When this was over. He'd made up his mind about it somewhere between the coffee at 5:15 and watching her stand up in front of that judge and tell the truth without hiding from any of it. The curtain opened. Lily walked back across the room and sat beside Jack. She folded her hands again. She looked forward. "How was it?" Jack murmured. "Fine," she said in a very small voice. He looked at her more carefully. Her eyes were bright in a way that meant she'd been crying, or was very close to it, or was working very hard not to. "Lily." "I'm okay," she said. He asked good questions. Jack put his hand over both of hers on the table. She turned her hands over and gripped his and held on, and he felt the small, fierce strength of it, and something happened in his chest that he was not going to examine in a room full of people. Judge Bellamy came back to his table. He sat down. He arranged his papers. He took a drink of water. Then he looked at Greer. "I've read the evidence," he said. "I've heard from the respondent. I've spoken with the child, and I want to address something before I give my decision." He paused. "The photographs presented by the petitioner document a crisis response to a dangerous situation. What they do not document, what is extensively documented in the respondent's materials, is the context of a woman who has worked with extraordinary consistency and creativity to provide for her daughter under circumstances that would have broken most people." He looked at his papers. "Lily Carter told me something in private that I'm going to paraphrase with her permission. She said..." He checked his notes. "She said that her mother sometimes told her things were fine when they weren't, and that she knew that. And that it didn't feel like lying. It felt like her mother not wanting her to be scared." He looked up. An 8-year-old child who can make that distinction is not a child who is being failed. The room was extremely quiet. "The emergency custody petition is denied," Judge Bellamy said. Greer was on his feet. "Your Honor, if I might..." "You might not," Judge Bellamy said, with a mildness that was more effective than volume. "I'm also ordering a family support plan in lieu of any further custody proceedings. This will include mediated contact between Lily Carter and her paternal grandmother, supported housing resources for Ms. Carter, and a follow-up review in 6 months." He looked at both sides of the room. "This family has experienced significant loss and significant hardship. What they do not need is more separation. What they need is support." He closed his folder. "We're adjourned." The sound that came from Rachel was not loud. It was small, barely audible, a single exhaled breath that carried 3 years in it. She put both hands over her face and sat very still. Linda put her hand on Rachel's arm. Jack sat there. Lily turned and looked at her mother. She didn't say anything. She reached over and put her small hand on Rachel's back, between her shoulder blades, and held it there. That was all. Just that small, steady hand. After a moment, Rachel lowered her hands. Her eyes were red. She looked at Linda first, "Thank you," and then at Jack, just looked at him for a moment, with everything she didn't have words for yet, and then she looked at Lily. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," Lily said. "Are you getting there?" Rachel said. Across the room. Evelyn Carter had not moved. She was sitting in her chair with Greer beside her, speaking quietly into her ear. She wasn't listening to him. She was watching Rachel and Lily. And then something happened that none of them had prepared for. Lily got up. She walked across the room. She stopped in front of Evelyn Carter and looked at her grandmother with those eyes that were so much like Andrew's that Jack could see Evelyn actually flinch at them. "Grandma," Lily said. Her voice was clear and entirely without accusation. Just a statement, a question, an observation, all in one. "Why do you only visit when you're trying to take me away?" The room, the small crowd that had gathered Linda Greer. The reporter near the door went completely silent. Evelyn's composure held for exactly 3 seconds. Then it broke. Not dramatically. It just gave way. The way something does when it's been held under too much pressure for too long. Her face crumpled. Her hands, which had been so precisely folded on the table, came apart. She pressed them over her mouth, and her whole body seemed to decrease to become smaller. And when she finally spoke, her voice had none of the controlled authority Jack had imagined in it from everything Rachel had told him. "You look like him," Evelyn said. "You look so much like your father. And every time I see your face, I can't..." She stopped, pressed her hands harder. "I thought if I could just make things right for you, make them controlled and safe and..." She shook her head. "I thought that would feel like doing something for him. Because I can't do anything for him anymore." Lily stood there. She looked at her grandmother for a long time. Then she said, "I miss him too." Evelyn looked up. "I don't really remember him," Lily said with the heartbreaking honesty of a child who was 5 when her father died. "I mostly remember what Mom tells me, but I want to know more." A pause. "You could tell me things. About him, if you wanted. The silence went on long enough that it became something else. Something that had weight and texture to it. Evelyn looked past Lily at Rachel. Her eyes asked something that her mouth wasn't ready to say yet. Rachel stood. She walked across the room and stopped beside Lily. "Come see her on an ordinary day," Rachel said. Her voice was quiet. Without anger, without performance, without anything except meaning it. No lawyers, no hearings, just be her grandmother. Evelyn looked at Lily. She reached out slowly like she was afraid of the gesture and put one hand against Lily's cheek. Lily let her. "Okay," Evelyn said, very quietly. "Okay." Greer started to say something. Evelyn looked at him with an expression that stopped him completely. "Withdraw it," she said. "Mrs. Carter, if you'll just let me explain the strategic—" "Withdraw everything," she said. "All of it." Greer looked at her. He looked at the judge who had paused in gathering his papers and was watching this with an expression that was not surprised. "As you wish," Greer said with the resigned tone of a man who has been overruled by his client in front of an audience before. Rachel stood very still. Evelyn stood. She was small. She'd seemed imposing in photographs, but standing here in this ordinary room, she was just a small woman who had lost her son and made the wrong choices about what to do with the loss. She looked at Rachel. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." Rachel didn't answer right away. She had the right to be angry. She had more than the right. She'd had 3 weeks of investigators and photographs and the specific terror of someone trying to take what you love most, and forgiveness in the face of, that is not a simple thing and should not be made to look like one. "Come on Sunday," Rachel said finally. "For dinner. We'll be at the farmhouse." Something shifted in Evelyn's face. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of everything," Rachel said. "But I'm sure Lily should know her grandmother." Evelyn nodded. Once. She looked at Lily one more time, and Lily looked back at her, and between them was Andrew Carter, present and absent in equal measure, the way people you love continue to exist in the faces of the people they left behind. Then the moment released. People began to move. Chairs scraped back. Papers shuffled. Nora appeared. Jack hadn't even seen her come in with her coat and her particular expression of a woman who had been quietly monitoring the entire situation and was cautiously satisfied with the outcome. Walter was not there. He'd told Jack the night before that courtrooms gave him hives, but Jack knew he was going to call the minute they were out the door. Jack walked with Rachel and Lily out of the community hall and into the cold. On the steps, Rachel stopped. She put her face up toward the sky for a moment. Eyes closed. Just breathing. The cold air moved around her, and she stood in it and breathed. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Jack. "The council vote is this afternoon," she said. He stared at her. "Rachel, the winter shelter funding," she said. "Diane Mercer said it was going to be close. If it doesn't pass, Warm Doors becomes the only—" "Rachel," Jack said. She looked at him. "Can we have 20 minutes?" he said, "before you start managing the next thing." She looked at him for a moment. Then slowly, like something that had been held back for a very long time, finally getting permission to exist. She smiled. Not the controlled, almost smile he'd seen before. A real one, unguarded, reaching all the way up. 20 minutes, she said. "Thank you," he said. Lily appeared between them, pulling her coat closed against the cold. She looked up at both of them. "Are we getting hot chocolate?" she said. Jack looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Jack. "Yes," Jack said. "We are absolutely getting hot chocolate." They walked down the steps together, the three of them, into the cold December morning, and for the first time since Claire had died, Jack Sullivan walked through the world feeling like the next 20 minutes mattered, and the 20 after that, and all the minutes beyond those that he'd spent 2 years telling himself were not his to want. He didn't say any of that to Rachel. Not yet. There would be time. What he said was, "There's a place on Maple that makes it with real chocolate, none of the powdered mix." "That's the only kind worth having," Rachel said. "I want marshmallows," Lily said. "Obviously," Jack said. They turned the corner. Behind them in the community hall, The council was preparing to vote on whether Cedar Falls would fund its most vulnerable residents through the worst of the winter. And inside the room where the hearing had been, a woman named Evelyn Carter sat alone for a moment with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. Mourning a son she would mourn for the rest of her life, and making up her mind to stop letting grief take up the seat that was meant for something else. Something that was still alive and 8 years old, and had her son's eyes, and was somehow offering her a Sunday dinner she hadn't earned, and probably didn't deserve. She stood up. She put on her coat. She thought about what she was going to bring on Sunday. Andrew had always liked apple cake. Walter Green, she'd heard, knew Dorothy's recipe. Maybe she'd ask him. The afternoon came fast, the way afternoons do in December, when the light starts failing by 3. The council meeting was already underway when Jack and Rachel and Lily arrived at the community hall for the second time that day, this time to a different kind of tension. The particular civic tension of a budget vote in a small town where everyone knows exactly whose heating assistance and whose shelter bed and whose family is on the line. Diane Mercer stood at the front of the room. She had the statement she'd given to Walter. She didn't read from it. She just talked about what she'd seen when she walked into Sullivan's Hardware 3 weeks ago, expecting to find an operation that might become a liability, and instead finding a woman with a notebook and a system and a sign on the door that said, "We'll figure it out." About what it said about a community that showed up in that specific way. About what it said about the town. They were going to be the kind that funded its most vulnerable members through the cold, or the kind that found out what happened when it didn't. She spoke for 8 minutes. The vote was 5-2 in favor of continued funding. Sullivan's Hardware was officially designated a community warming partner with a small operating grant to cover extended hours and supply costs. When Diane announced the result, the room reacted in that particular way that rooms do when something that felt uncertain resolves into relief, a collective exhale, a brief surge of sound that died back quickly as people remembered that the problem wasn't solved, only extended. There was still a deficit. There were still families with no heat. There was still a lot of winter left. But Warm Doors had a mandate. And Rachel Carter, who had built it in 3 weeks in a back room with an index card labeling system and a black marker, was the person who was going to run it. Jack watched her in the council room, talking to Diane Mercer, and he thought about the woman who had rolled a window down 2 inches in a blizzard and said, "Can I help you?" in the most controlled voice he'd ever heard. He thought about the note she'd left him. "People who stand beside me eventually lose something." He thought about 2 years of heated rooms and closed doors and survival masquerading as living. He thought about Lily choosing the blue room. He thought about yellow. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and the farmhouse was quiet, Rachel found him in the hallway outside the door at the end of the corridor, the one that had been closed for 2 years. He was standing in front of it with his hands in his pockets. He hadn't heard her come up the stairs. "Jack," she said. He turned. She looked at him, then at the door, then back at him. "Is that the room?" she said. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to open it?" she said. He looked at the door. "I think so," he said. "Yeah, I think I do." He put his hand on the knob. He opened it. The room smelled like old wood and winter and time. The walls were pale, neither yellow nor white, the color of something that hasn't been decided yet. There was nothing in it, just space. And a window looking out at the backyard, and beyond that the dark December night, and beyond that all the time that was still ahead. He stood in the doorway. Rachel stood beside him. They didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed to be said, not right now, not at the end of this particular day. Some things are said best by standing together in a doorway and letting the silence be what it is. Not emptiness, but room. Space that's waiting to become something. After a while, Rachel said, "It's a good room." "It is," Jack said. "It'll need paint," she said. "I know," he said. "What color?" He looked at the walls. "I was thinking yellow," he said. Rachel looked at him. Her eyes in the dim light from the hallway were warm and tired and real, and they were looking at him the same way they'd looked at him across a kitchen table at 5:15 in the morning before the most important day of her life. Like he was a person she had decided to trust, which was the most serious thing Rachel Carter ever did with anything. "Yellow's good," she said. He closed the door. Not because they were finished with it. Because they had just started, and some things deserve to begin slowly in the right light, with enough time to do them right. He turned off the hallway light. They went downstairs. The kitchen was warm. 1 year is a long time and no time at all depending on what fills it. Jack thought about that on the first Saturday of December, exactly 12 months after the storm that had buried Cedar Falls and changed everything he thought he knew about the shape his life was taking. He was standing at the front counter of Sullivan's Hardware going over the warm doors schedule for the week when he heard the bell above the door and looked up and saw Lily come in from school. She was 9 now, an inch taller at least. She had a new backpack, a real one her size, deep green with her initials on the front zipper pocket that Walter had given her for her birthday in October. She still went straight to the chair beside the cast iron heater. Some things do not change, and some things, you are grateful, don't. But today, Lily did not sit down. She came to the counter and set her bag down and looked at Jack with those serious eyes, and then she looked past him toward the window. "There's a boy outside," she said. Jack looked up from the schedule. "A boy." "By the window," she said. "He's been out there for a while. His coat is too small." She paused. "He has crackers. He's eating them really slowly." Jack set down his pen. "I didn't move yet." He just looked at Lily, 9 years old, standing in a hardware store in Cedar Falls, carrying a knowledge in her body that she'd earned the hard way and would carry all her life. "His name is Noah," she said. "He's in 3rd grade. He told me his dad is waiting outside." Jack looked toward the front window. There was parked at the far end of the lot in the spot where a blue minivan had sat 1 year ago. An old pickup truck with one headlight out and a crack running the length of the windshield. There was a man behind the wheel. He wasn't looking at the store. He was looking at his hands. Jack knew that posture. He had seen it before. He had seen it in a rearview mirror and in a parking lot and in every person who has ever sat outside a warm place and talked themselves into believing they had no right to go in. Lily was watching him. "What do you want to do, Lily?" he said. He asked it carefully because he already knew, but he wanted her to say it. She didn't even pause. "I want you to invite them in," she said, "and give them the warmest seats." Jack reached under the counter. He had a coffee maker back there now, a good one. Rachel's suggestion from 6 months ago, because a warming center, she'd said, should have something warm to give people the moment they walked in the door, before anything else was decided. He filled 2 mugs with hot chocolate from the small station beside it. They kept a supply going from November through February, now part of the standard operation, and he held them out to Lily. She took them, both of them. She straightened her shoulders. "Go ahead," Jack said. She went. He watched through the front window. Lily walked out into the December cold, with a mug in each hand, and went directly to the passenger side of the pickup truck. She knocked on the window. The boy inside Noah's small coat, clearly a size too small. The particular look of a child who is trying very hard not to need anything rolled it down. Jack could not hear what Lily said. But he watched Noah look at her, and then look at the mug she was offering, and then look at his father, who had seen the whole thing, and who was now gripping the steering wheel with both hands and staring at a 9-year-old girl standing in his parking lot, in the cold, with hot chocolate. The father's door opened. Jack turned and went to put on more coffee. Rachel was in the back, running the afternoon coordination call for Warm Doors. She did it every day at 4, touching base with the county programs, the housing nonprofit, the volunteer drivers who ran the delivery circuit through the south end of town. Jack could hear her voice through the office door, even and precise and completely in command of whatever she was managing. And he felt the thing he always felt when he heard that voice doing that particular work, which was a combination of admiration and something quieter and more private that he'd stopped trying to find a smaller word for some months ago. He had proposed in September, not as a grand gesture, not with a ring in a restaurant or a public declaration. They had been fixing a heater together, one of the older portable units from the Warm Doors inventory that had started making a sound. Rachel correctly identified as a failing thermostat, and they were on the floor of the storage room with the casing open and tools between them and Lily at school. And Jack had looked at Rachel across the disassembled heater and said quietly and without preamble, "I'd like to marry you. When you're ready, if you want to. There's no urgency and no pressure, I just wanted you to know that's where I am." Rachel had looked at him for a long moment. "You proposed to me in front of a broken heater," she said. "I did," he said. "That is the most accurate possible representation of our relationship," she said. "I thought so," he said. She had looked back at the heater. She picked up the screwdriver. She finished tightening the thermostat housing before she said anything else. Then she said, "Yes." Just that. No performance. No tears, at least not right. Then those came later privately in a way she would describe to him afterward as unexpected and slightly annoying, and also completely appropriate. Just yes said, in the same even voice she used for everything that mattered most to her, because Rachel Carter's deepest feelings were always expressed in the quietest register. They were not married yet. That was a conversation for spring, they'd decided, when Rachel was settled into the new apartment she'd signed in February, and had lived in independently for 6 months, and had proven to herself, not to anyone else, to herself specifically, that she had chosen Jack Sullivan from a place of freedom and not necessity. That distinction mattered to her enormously, and because it mattered to her, it mattered to Jack, which is one of the clearest signs that love has moved past its early stages into something durable. The apartment was 10 minutes from the farmhouse. Lily had arranged the furniture herself. She had put her boots beside the front door and her books on the windowsill, and within 48 hours had transformed it from a space into a home in the particular way that Lily transformed every space she occupied through the simple insistence of being fully present in it. She spent 3 days a week at the farmhouse. They all had dinner together on Sundays. It was not a perfect arrangement by any formal definition, but it was honest and chosen and built by adults who had learned the hard way, both of them, that the shape of a family does not have to match a template to be real. The office door opened. Rachel came out with her notebook and her phone and the particular expression she wore after a coordination call that had produced more work than it had resolved, which was most of them. She looked at the front window. She saw the pickup truck. She saw Noah and his father coming across the lot with Lily between them. She looked at Jack. "How long?" she said. "Lily noticed him about 20 minutes ago," Jack said. Rachel watched Lily walk the man and the boy toward the door. She watched the way Lily was talking, not too much, not performing cheerfulness, just moving beside them in a way that made the approach feel natural instead of fraught. "She's good at this," Rachel said. "She learned from someone," Jack said. Rachel looked at him, then back at Lily. The look on her face was the one he knew now as the pride and grief combination, though the grief had gotten quieter over the past year. Not gone, it would never be entirely gone, but quieter the way grief does when the living starts to fill more of the space. Lily held the door open. Noah came in first, gripping his mug with both hands, looking at the store with the wide, careful eyes of a child taking inventory of an unfamiliar space. His father came in behind him. He was in his mid-30s, unshaven, a work jacket that had seen significant mileage. He stopped just inside the door and looked at Jack with an expression that had shame in it, and something underneath the shame that was closer to relief, the way people look when they've been afraid to ask for something for a long time, and someone has gone ahead and answered before the asking was finished. "I'm Jack Sullivan," Jack said. "This is my store. You're welcome here." The man swallowed. Tom, he said. "Tom Grady." "Tom," Jack said. "This is Rachel. She runs Warm Doors, which is our community assistance program. She's going to talk to you about what we do and what's available." Rachel stepped forward. She had the notebook. She had the specific expression she put on for these conversations. Not soft, exactly. Not performing warmth, but present. Fully, completely present, which is the only thing that actually helps. "Tom," she said. "Come sit down. Noah, there's more hot chocolate if you want it. Lily knows where everything is." Lily was already moving toward the small station. She didn't look back. She didn't need direction. She knew exactly what was needed, and she provided it without making it a production, exactly the way her mother had once organized a back room in the dark at 6 in the morning, with a notebook and a black marker, and a determination to turn chaos into something useful. Tom sat down at the counter. Rachel sat across from him. She opened the notebook. "Tell me what's going on," she said. "All of it. We'll figure out what we can do." Jack moved to the far end of the counter and gave them space. He had learned that from Rachel too, the understanding that some conversations need room around them. That presence does not always mean proximity. That the most useful thing you can sometimes do for a person is remove yourself from their field of vision and let them speak without an audience. I went to check the donation inventory in the back, which needed updating anyway. He was back there for 20 minutes. When he came out, Tom Grady was still talking, and Rachel was still writing, and Noah was sitting beside Lily at the chair by the heater, with his coat off, the too small coat, which Rachel had silently assessed, and which Jack knew would be replaced before they left today, looking at an old home repair magazine that Lily had passed him. Noah held it up. He pointed to a diagram. He said something to Lily. Lily leaned over and looked. She said something back with the tone of someone explaining something they find genuinely interesting. Noah listened. He nodded. He looked at the diagram again. Jack stood at the end of the counter and felt something press against the inside of his chest. Not painfully, not sadly, but with the particular weight of a moment that contains other moments inside it. He saw Lily at 8, sitting in that same chair, reading those same magazines, waiting with a patience that had looked like quietness, but had been something much more active. He saw Rachel rolling down the car window 2 inches. He saw Walter's kitchen and Dorothy's photographs, and the note that said, "People who stand beside me eventually lose something," and the blue room at the farmhouse, and the open door with the pale walls that were now, as of 3 weeks ago, painted yellow. I thought about Claire. I thought about her often and differently than he used to. In the first 2 years, thinking about her had felt like opening a wound necessary. Maybe, but painful in a way that kept you from doing much else. Now it felt more like what it actually was, which was remembering someone you loved who was gone, and finding in the remembering not only loss, but everything she'd been glad of. The store, the town, the people she'd believed deserved more than they had, the life she'd told him to keep living. I thought she would have liked Rachel. He thought she would have loved Lily without reservation. He thought that the yellow room was a way of telling her that he'd understood finally what she meant. The door opened. Walter Green came in, which was not unusual. He stopped by 3 or 4 times a week now, ostensibly to check the donation inventory, or ask about the delivery schedule actually, because he liked being here and had stopped pretending otherwise. He was wearing the new coat from this season's donation drive, which fit him correctly, and which he'd resisted accepting until Rachel had pointed out very directly that someone had donated it specifically to be used, and refusing to use it was a form of waste. He looked at Tom and Noah at the counter. He looked at Rachel. He looked at Lily. He came to stand beside Jack. "New family," he said quietly. "New family," Jack said. Walter watched Noah look at the magazine. He watched Lily explain something. He watched Noah nod. "She's good with people," Walter said. "She is," Jack said. "She gets it from her mother," Walter said. Jack smiled. "She does." Walter looked at him. He had the particular look he sometimes got when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. "You and Rachel set a date yet?" "Working on it," Jack said. "Spring," Walter said, as if confirming something. "Probably spring." "Dorothy and I got married in April," Walter said. 1971. She wore her mother's dress, and I was so nervous I put my shoes on the wrong feet and didn't notice until we were at the reception. He paused. "Best day of my life." Jack looked at him. "I'm just saying," Walter said mildly. "April is a good month." Rachel looked up from the counter, then across the room at Jack, with a glance that lasted exactly 1 second and contained approximately everything. He held it. Then she looked back at Tom Grady and said something that made the man's shoulders drop from around his ears, that particular physical release of a person who has just been told they are not as alone as they thought they were. By the time Tom and Noah left an hour later, Tom had an appointment for a furnace inspection that afternoon, a referral to the County Energy Assistance Program. Noah had a coat that fit, and Lily had given Noah the home repair magazine he'd been reading on the grounds that she'd already read all the good parts twice. "You gave it away," Jack said. "He wanted to know more about the water heater diagram," Lily said simply. "I already know about it." Jack thought about that for a moment. "Lily," he said. She looked up at him. "You did a good thing today," he said. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "I just did what you did," she said. "Last year, I just did the same thing." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "Then we're even," he said. She smiled, the real one, the one that went all the way up like Rachel's did when it was genuine, and went to help Rachel update the evening delivery schedule. That evening, after Tom's furnace had been inspected and 2 more warm doors visits completed after Walter had gone home and the store had been locked, and the new family, Tom and Noah Grady, had been connected to resources that did not require them to pretend they didn't need them. Jack sat in the office going over the week's schedule. Rachel appeared in the doorway. She had her coat on. She was going home to the apartment she kept her own hours, her own space, her own clear line between her life and the life they were building together. And Jack respected that, the same way he respected everything she did, which was by understanding why it mattered to her and letting it matter. "Good day," she said. "Good day," he agreed. She looked at him with those dark eyes that he knew now in all their registers, the controlled and the unguarded, the tired and the energized, the grief and the alive. "Jack," she said. "Yeah." "April," she said, "is a good month." He looked at her. She was looking back at him with the expression that meant she'd made up her mind about something and was telling him as a courtesy, which was the way Rachel Carter made all her most important decisions. "I heard that too," he said. She nodded once. She said goodnight. She left. He heard the bell above the door. He sat in the office for a moment in the quiet of the store. The heater ticked. The wind moved outside. The cast iron stove in the corner held its warmth the way it had for decades through every winter, reliable as anything he knew. He thought about Lily walking across the parking lot with 2 cups of hot chocolate. He thought about Noah reading the diagram. He thought about Tom Grady's shoulders dropping. He thought about April. He thought about a question whispered by an 8-year-old girl in a December storm. Small, careful, rehearsed, brave. "Can my mom come get warm too?" And all the doors that question had opened, including the ones inside himself that he hadn't known were still capable of opening. He got up. He turned off the office light. He walked through the store, past the cast iron heater, past the chair beside it, where Lily had sat for 3 weeks reading old magazines and waiting for exactly the right moment to ask the right question. He stopped at the door. He looked back at the chair. I thought about everything it had started. One chair. One child. One question that had nothing in it except love for her mother and the particular courage of someone who has been cold and knows how to recognize warmth when she's standing next to it. He turned off the last light. He locked the door. Outside Cedar Falls was cold and dark and full of people who were warm because enough other people had decided that warmth was something you shared and not something you hoarded, that helping someone keep their dignity costs nothing and means everything, that the smallest questions asked by the smallest people in the coldest moments can change the entire direction of a life. Jack Sullivan walked to his truck. He drove home through the December dark to a yellow room and a future he had almost missed, and a life that had been waiting patiently for him to stop calling the closed-door wisdom. And in the morning, the store would open. The chair would be there, and someone new would come in out of the cold, because they always did in Cedar Falls in December, in every town that has learned to leave a light on and mean it. That is how a community is built. Not in grand gestures, not in policy documents, or budget votes or press releases, but in the ordinary daily decision to notice the person sitting outside in the cold, to walk toward them instead of away, and to ask simply without ceremony, without requiring anything in return, whether they want to come in. One question changes one life. One life changes 10. 10 lives change a town. And a town that has learned to notice, really notice before a child has to ask twice, is a town that has finally understood what warmth is actually for.